And now it's my very great pleasure to introduce our next speaker to you, an individual whose career spans climate action, economic strategy, diplomacy, entrepreneurship, and technology. So I'm delighted to welcome to the podium Singapore's first ambassador for climate action and senior advisor to the National Climate Change Secretariat at the Prime Minister's Office. Ravi Menon, please give him a warm welcome.
Thank you, Chris. I think Chris Hayward has provided us a very good overview of the issues relating to transition finance, setting the stage for what I can share with you over the next 10 minutes. Ladies and gentlemen, transition finance, especially in the developing countries of the world, remains severely inadequate. We are still about $1.5 trillion short each year of what is required to meet the goals of the Paris Agreement. Public capital is willing, but not sufficient to bridge the gap. Private capital is sufficient, but not willing to take the risks. Why is transition finance not flowing at the scale and pace needed? One, the cost of capital is too high, which means the real or perceived risks are high. Two, the carbon price is not high enough. Today I want to talk about two key levers that can unlock transition finance, the transition finance that's necessary for global decarbonization. First, blended finance to address the cost of capital issue. And two, carbon credits to address the lack of a carbon price. Blended finance is about synergizing public, private, and philanthropic capital to make transition projects bankable. Today, too much public capital, be it from sovereigns or multilateral development banks, is going into bankable projects that private capital can finance. In a sense, it's almost crowding out. A far more effective use of scarce public capital is to help reduce the risk of marginally bankable transition projects and attract multiples of private capital to these projects. In short, public and philanthropic capital should aim to be catalytic, not duplicative. Blended finance uses a combination of catalytic capital and technical assistance to catalyze private commercial capital. Catalytic capital or concessional capital could be in the form of grants, guarantees, or financing at below market rates by public sources or philanthropic sources. Very importantly, by helping to absorb first loss risk in these transition projects, it improves project bankability, thereby attracting private commercial capital. Technical assistance in the form of project development expertise, capacity building, and institutional support also help to reduce risks, strengthen confidence, and improve bankability. So the key is to improve the bankability of the many transition projects that today go unattended to in the global south. This is why Singapore launched a blended finance platform called FASTP, or Financing Asia's Transition Partnership. FASTP will support green and transition projects in Asia, from phasing out coal and strengthening grid infrastructure to electrifying transportation and decarbonizing industrial processes. The Singapore government has pledged $500 million as concessional capital to be matched dollar for dollar by other sources of concessional capital from other sovereigns and philanthropies. The aim is then to use this $1 billion base of concessional capital to crowd in 4 times more private capital for a total fund size of $5 billion. FASB has to date attracted both sovereign and philanthropic funds, which in turn has motivated banks and asset managers to come on board. FASB is making good progress towards its $5 billion target and looks forward to making some announcements at COP30. The second key lever to unlock private finance for transition is carbon credits. Speakers before me have spoken about this. Carbon credits are a market-based solution to bridge the financing gap, particularly when policy and economic incentives are lacking. On the supply side, carbon credits are generated by mitigation activities that reduce or remove carbon emissions. And if not for the revenue generated from these credits, these activities would not have occurred. Now, on the demand side, entities may want to purchase such credits to help their hard-to-abate residual emissions. This convergence of demand and supply creates a win-win situation globally. For developing countries where financing needs far outpace available resources, carbon credits create an additional pathway to fund critical mitigation projects. For sovereign and corporate buyers, many in the advanced economies, credits offer a transparent and credible way to meet emissions reductions targets. Yet we all know carbon markets have not been functioning well. On the supply side, there have been valid concerns about the environmental integrity of some of the carbon credits being generated. On the demand side, there is also a lack of consensus regarding how businesses can or cannot use credits to meet their net zero targets. But we must not throw the baby out with the bathwater. We need to tackle these issues comprehensively and in close partnership. And I'm happy to say that this effort is underway. The supply-side integrity issues are being addressed systematically. There is now growing consensus of what a high-quality carbon credit looks like. Thanks to Article 6.4 concluded last year, ICVCM and CORSIA setting global standards. The World Bank has been providing technical assistance and capacity building for carbon projects in many developing countries to make sure that the credits generated are of high integrity. Singapore has been working with partners to promote high-integrity transition credits. This is a new class of carbon credits to channel finance towards transition projects. A good use case of transition credits is phasing out coal in Asia. Most of the coal-fired power plants in Asia are young and have an operational lifetime of at least 30 years more, making early closure or immediate shutdown commercially unviable. But if they are left operational for the next 30 years, these plants alone will exhaust 2/3 of the carbon budget that we have remaining to keep global temperatures below 1.5 degrees Celsius. So what's the solution? You can't let them go on indefinitely. You can't shut them down immediately. Well, you can think of providing incentives for the early retirement of these coal plants, replacing them with renewables. If we can generate transition credits from the emissions reduction that's attributable to the early closure of these coal plants, we can finance the managed phase-out of coal in Asia. And let's not forget, 1 out of every 6 tons of carbon dioxide emissions in the atmosphere today comes from these coal plants in Asia. Singapore is working with partners to test the feasibility of transition credits. We're doing so with 2 pilots involving coal-fired power plants in the Philippines. We hope that sovereigns, companies, and standard setters recognize the potential of transition credits and work together to stimulate demand for such credits. So that's the supply side. Now, on the demand side, Singapore has signed agreements with 7 other countries to buy carbon credits compliant with Article 6 of the Paris Agreement. As an added demand incentive, carbon tax liable companies in Singapore can offset up to 5% of their taxable emissions using Article 6 compliant carbon credits. So when the government and carbon tax liabilities in Singapore purchase these credits, they are contributing to decarbonization efforts in our partner countries. But demand for compliance credits alone is not enough to resuscitate the carbon markets. we need to reignite demand for voluntary credits too, to generate the financing needed for decarbonization in the global south. Governments need to step in to encourage strong voluntary demand for carbon credits. Following the UK's lead, Singapore published last week guidance on how companies in Singapore can use carbon credits alongside a credible decarbonization plan. But it's not enough that just the UK and Singapore governments do this. More countries need to step forward to provide guidance on the use of carbon credits. Our two countries have been engaging partners and look forward to announcing the fruits of our efforts tomorrow. Let me conclude. Today, our bandwidth and attention span is being caught in a variety of current immediate challenges. Political support in many countries for climate action is wavering. The economic environment globally is highly uncertain, not to mention geopolitical risks rising. But let's not forget, these are not reasons to delay climate action, because the timeline is not set by business cycles, it is not set by electoral cycles, it is set by nature. And nature is suffering. The planet's timeline will eventually impose its will on us. The question for us is, will it be a disorderly, hurried transition 10 years from now, or can we do things more systematically in an orderly fashion so that we can manage the transition better? Thank you very much. Thank you.